Welcome. We're going on another journey back in time, November, December 1971. And I thought I had all of them, but this one I couldn't find. And so we started begging, and this guy named Corey, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, G-U-E, from West Virginia, said, hey, I got one, I'll send it to you. And so this is his that he was kind enough to send to me. And I will get it back to him, you know. And so, again, here we go. This is, again, a cartoon, but it's a good illustration of how crazy it was back then, how quick people were changing boats, changing vehicles they drove. And again, these are two of my favorites here. You know, guys look over the bill trying to save a $3 lure, you know, his buddy handing it. But this is probably one of my favorite. And I don't know if you can read it, but it's basically, he says, I wonder when my partner is going to figure out I'm no longer in the boat. I actually witnessed that. I was fishing a tournament at Lake Somerville, Texas. It was one of the first big tournaments I'd ever fished. And there was probably 200 boats in it. And in all sizes and shapes. Just kind of like it shows here, you had boats that were small and big. I had one of the smaller ones. I had a 14-foot with a 25-horse Evinrude on it. And the one thing I learned, because these were all what they called shotgun starts back then. You'd get out there, and all of a sudden, you'd shoot a shotgun, and everybody take off at the same time. It doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to realize what took place. And so I realized very, very quickly in shotgun starts, there's only two places to be. You better have the fastest one or two boats, so you get out ahead and you stay ahead, or you better have one of the slowest one or two boats, which I had, and you just wait until they all take off. And so they did. He shot the gun, and boy, everybody took off. Of course, it's just like you're inside a commode that's been flushed. Water going everywhere, circling around. And finally, I start to take off, and there's nothing but one wave after another. And I looked up, and I see this guy floating in the water waving. And I finally, you know, and boats were dodging him, because he was just out there in the middle of this commode, boats dodging him everywhere. And I finally got to him, and I go, I looked at him, and he's just totally in shock. So we grabbed him and pulled him. Two other boats pulled up and helped, and one of them had a bigger boat, and we actually put him in that guy's boat. But then we all started we took him back to the dock, and we all started, the two or three boats that were with me started laughing. Same as here. And we said, I wonder, that guy, what's he going to do when he gets to his first fishing spot and turns around and his partner's not there? Because back then, half of the boats in this were front end steering, and that's what his partner's in the front, and he's fighting the water. You know he didn't look around, and his partner flew out. So fortunately, he was not hurt, and eventually we got rid of that shotgun start deal, thank goodness. This is an interesting deal that some of you will remember, especially back in Texas. This was actually one of the very first big money tournaments. It was the World Bass Fishing Group out of Dallas, Texas. This was their first tournament. They put on Sam Rayburn. And the most significant thing about that for me was two of the boys, it was in the middle of the summer, and the boys that won it were two of them were brothers, and the guy that was third had fished with one of them on first day. They would call all their fish on topwater, schooling back in Sam Rayburn up the Angelina River, and the timber's so thick still you can't see the bank. And of course that's what I wanted to do. I drew a buoy, and I lost the flip. Back then it was still, you've got to flip if you can't make up your mind whose boat you're going to take. And so finally we run up, I was up the Tallyak River. And so we run up the Tallyak, and he says, well, where are your fish up there? We were in a boat lane. And I said, well, see that point way back in there? That's where my fish are, they're schooling. He says, I'm not going back in there with my boat. I said, what? He said, no. He said, this is a brand new boat, and all I'm going to do is scratch it up if I go back in there. And this is one of those lessons I learned the hard way, that you really do your due diligence with these guys and pick their brains before you commit to what boat or where they're willing to go or not willing to go. And but it was a $50,000 first prize, which was back then was humongous. I mean, and it was, I'm going to try to see here. The other thing is in that tournament, and I've got his picture here again, Roland. That's the first time I ever drew Roland Martin. And I drew him the second day of the tournament. I hadn't done good to the guy that I fished with the first day. And I blamed it on him like all of us anglers do. We blame it on somebody else. But I couldn't get, he wouldn't even go back in the timber where the fish were. Anyway, Roland, we drew him. I drew him, and I was excited because I knew who he was. And to make a long story short, we fished all over the lake. And we didn't do very good. And as a young rookie, at the end of the day, I kind of looked at him, and I was still in awe of who I was with, and go, well, it looks like we're finished for this tournament. He says, it's not over for me. He says, don't let the tournament be over. You still got one more day to go. And I'll never forget that as long as I live, because that day, that next day, he had one of the biggest stringers of the tournament and didn't win it, but he moved up into the top 10. And I'll never forget, he says, it's not over for me, even though we had a terrible day on the second day. So that was an inspiring, teaching moment for me. And then again, I'm just going to hint on this. We did this in one of our last issues, was about logbooks. And this guy actually is showing all the data that he put down in his logbook. And he's fairly detailed information, you know, water temperature, weather, and all those things I'm not going to read off here. And then he kind of summarizes it, what direction the wind was blowing out of, and a little map of where he caught his fish. And I started in the beginning keeping pretty complex logs, but over time, and this is for your information, you that are keep logs, I realized I didn't need the detail. There's really only several things that were important to me that became important over time, and that was basically just the lake conditions, lake level, water temperatures, air temperatures, and yeah, put down what lures seemed to work best. If you didn't win it, you could get the locals to tell you, or your bass club guy to tell you what lures they were using that worked best. This is just something really, it became for me a way to refresh my memory, because I had logs that went back 5 and 6 years and longer eventually. And so it was just to wake up my brain, because your brain's amazing. I can still, at 78 years old, go in most coves I've ever fished and tell you, point exactly where I've caught a fish. And this was 30, 40 years ago. So I just trying to help my brain a little bit with this. And here's kind of emphasizing, this issue seems to be for me about Roland. Martin's luck, no accident. Because, you know, and we've heard all kinds of cliches about luck nowadays, you know, like those who work the hardest get the luckiest, and things like that. I'm not going to try to repeat, but there's many of them. But again, this just reinforced in me that so many times in the beginning, I don't care who you were, or at least you were hoping you'd be on a lake and you just pull in this magical cove, and the whole cove would come up schooling with bass everywhere. And it happens maybe enough if you fished long enough, but you start to wish that happens every day, and it's not going to. And essentially, you know, Roland again turned it into a science. And you don't depend on luck. I learned that later on when I did join the circuit. Don't depend on luck. You'll starve to death. And so I knew I had to start, like Roland did, adding the science of it to it, adding pattern fishing to it. Take control of your own destiny. Again, another issue. Thanks again, Corey, for letting me borrow your magazine. Looking forward to the next one.